Good afternoon, and thanks for being here even after the lunch break. I know it's always the most challenging panel of such a day. Everyone has nicely eaten and it's warm and the seats are cozy. Nevertheless, I hope that many of you will join in and we can use the fact that we have lost some people here. So we're fewer people now and it's more time for everyone to say things and not only ask questions. My name is Steff Kühne. I work for the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Berlin and I will try to facilitate this panel. I'm really looking forward to it because I will be speaking in the last panel as well, and there I'm thinking about saying something like we lack good examples of just transition. So the sessions that we're having now is called Best Practices in Just Transition, and this is exactly what I'm really looking forward to. We have 4 speakers here. And after that, hopefully, many speakers in the audience. So I would really ask the speakers to be brief with their thoughts, and I would ask all of you to share maybe not only questions but also general thoughts and own experiences. So we use this opportunity here for an exchange. The first speaker, you already see him here, is Jesse Aredin from Berkeley in the US. He's the mayor over there, and he has presented a video message for us. We didn't fly him in for climate issues, that's sure. So please, the floor is to Jesse.
Hello, my name is Jesse Aredin, and I'm the mayor of Berkeley, California. Thank you for inviting me to this conference, and I'm sorry that I cannot make it here in person. Berkeley has a reputation as a global city, and while we may be small in size, we are large in ideas. And as a home to the University of California and the Berkeley National Lab, and a stone's throw away from the Silicon Valley, we are a hub for technological innovation, particularly in energy efficiency and the green economy. We have long been at the forefront of energy policy. In 1986, the same year as the Renewable disaster, Berkeley citizens voted to make our city a nuclear-free zone. In 2009, the Berkeley City Council adopted a climate action plan, one of the first plans adopted in the United States, which seeks to address the consequences of climate change while setting goals to increase investment in renewable energy and decrease our greenhouse gas emissions in a variety of sectors: transportation, building energy usage. And so, in the next few minutes, I'm going to go over some of the programs and work that we've been doing in the city of Berkeley to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy and build on the work of our climate action plan. We're strong supporters of the Paris Agreement, not just in word but in action. The United States may be the only country in the world not willing to cooperate on this international effort, but that doesn't reflect the sentiment of cities and states across our nation. Because the federal government under Trump is reneging on its commitment to fight climate change, cities and states are stepping up to introduce environmental policies. And this is especially true in Berkeley, where 97% of our citizens voted against Trump in the election and have long been strong environmental advocates. In fact, just a few days ago, I sent a letter to the Environmental Protection Agency, in which Trump has appointed a climate denier as its administrator, urging them not to repeal the Clean Power Plan. Trump's assault on the environment has provided challenges for us, but we will not waver in our commitment in the fight against climate change. Our commitment to renewable energy will soon become a reality with the formation of the East Bay Community Energy Authority. This program allows consumers to choose clean energy options and gives residents more power in determining what sources of energy their electricity will come from. We are aiming to have 100% renewable energy be the default program in our city. And so far, 11 cities in Alameda County, representing 3.1 million people, have signed up for this program, which is expected to go live in 2018. And other countries and regions are looking into implementing similar programs to create clean power options and to increase investment in renewable energy. Citywide, we're developing strict energy and environmental standards for new construction and buildings that are being renovated. And this includes the installation of solar energy on roofs, of green roofs and green infrastructure, water retention, and implementing zero net energy usage and zero net energy construction. We recently vastly improved water consumption for municipal buildings and municipal properties, and our Building Energy Savings Ordinance requires that homeowners complete an audit about energy efficiency and aligns that audit with incentives provided by the state and by our local utility provider. Through our Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, PACE, which was founded at the City of Berkeley, is now a national model for assessments to finance solar improvements. Property owners in our city are able to levy a tax assessment to finance solar improvements as well as energy efficiency improvements. Another specific example of how we're innovating and designing our city buildings is our new downtown parking garage. And you may think that a parking garage would not be sustainable, but actually this is a model garage in which we're going to be not only installing solar on the roof of the property, which will be connected to a microgrid to provide energy for municipal buildings, including our public safety building. That way, in the event of an emergency, including an earthquake, we will continue to provide power to municipal buildings and continue to provide critical city services. This state-of-the-art parking garage will not just park cars, but will provide ample parking for bicycles and electric vehicle charging, and will really be a model of sustainability. And unlike cities in Europe, cities in the United States are frankly designed for car usage, not for pedestrian and bicycle usage. This is a problem when most half of our city's greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. That's why we're going the extra mile to promote alternatives to driving, such as walking, biking, and public transportation. Almost 10% of the commuters in Berkeley travel by bike, which is the highest percentage for a city of over 100,000 residents in the United States. But biking on busy streets is a deterrent for many because of the safety of our streets and the fact we do not have dedicated bicycle lanes to buffer bicyclists from automobile traffic. So to address this, we have developed and recently adopted a bicycle plan through the consultation of community members and bicyclists in our city, which will implement safer streets, including protected bicycle lanes, traffic calming, and implementing the concept of complete streets, which emphasizes multimodal connectivity of our roads. With public transportation, we're focusing new residential developments on transportation hubs. And many businesses and new residential developments offer transit passes, electric vehicle charging stations in their garages, and discounts on public transportation for the residents. The European Union should be proud of its accomplishments on the environment and climate change. I would argue that it's us that we have to learn from you about how to solve these global challenges. As President Macron is right when he says that we need to make our planet great again. This requires a collective effort on the part of all of us. And one point I'd like to make is that we need to think globally but also act locally. Municipalities have a great impact on how little or how much we will contribute towards environmental policies and addressing the crisis of climate change. And by creating programs that incentivize the use of renewable energy and alternative forms of transportation, we can get buy-in from our residents. The way we zone our cities, placing emphasis on transit-oriented development, can influence the way people use energy. And when our cities move forward on policies like this, our countries will follow suit. So we need to lead by example. We may be thousands of miles apart, but we're united in our desire for a greener planet and a cleaner future for everyone. And these actions must be made today, not tomorrow, or else we will risk not having a world tomorrow. But I'm confident through our collective ingenuity, we can pave a future that is free of fossil fuels, a future that halts humanity's destruction of the environment, and a future that enshrines energy policies that are truly sustainable. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing of the continued efforts of the European Union on this global issue. Thank you for inviting Berkeley to be part of this conversation. I regret once again that I'm not able to join you, and I hope that I was able to shed some light on the many policy efforts we're engaged in Berkeley to provide leadership, particularly in the face of our national government's abdication of its commitment to fight climate change. Cities throughout the United States are committed to working with the European Union to provide leadership in addressing this global crisis of climate change. Thank you so much.
So that was Jesse's address to us as the European Union. We will let him know that that people like it, but if you have any questions to him, you have to send an email. I think he should be easy to find. Since the next speakers are in the room, I suggest that we use this opportunity. If there are questions of understanding after the presentations, please briefly raise your arms for short questions of understanding directly after speakers have given their presentation. Otherwise, I suggest that for further discussion, we keep this to, let's say after the last speaker has finished. The next person I introduce to you is Jasmina on the left, from my side. Janina comes from the Fundació de l'Alternativa from Spain, and yeah, but she's Catalonia, right? Yeah, Catalonia. Sorry for that. I know it's it's written here. I don't know where your office is. Where's your office? Barcelona. Okay, Catalonia. I'm sorry. And you have a presentation for us, and the stage is yours.
Merci.
Thank you. I'll be speaking French. Or I can do it in Catalan, if you'd rather. But I think French is perhaps more widely understood here. So I'll stick with that. So I'm here to present a big project by my foundation, Fundació La Alternativa. We're quite a small foundation, a modest one, but in spite of the political situation, we continue our work on environmental issues, and we have created an energy team that is involved in a large project with a long-term aim of establishing various guides like this one. So this is the energy guide that we prepared this year. Next year we want to do water, and we'll be looking at other energy sources over the coming years in order to complete this big project. So the guide, the document, sorry, I'm going to have to take a break from speaking just to change the slide here. Here we go. There's a small summary for those of you who don't understand French. So why are we creating these guides? I've already mentioned that we're trying to think on the one hand about how to fight energy poverty, which a lot of people are affected by globally, but particularly in Spain, the crisis had a huge impact in terms of energy poverty, and the government completely failed to take into account those sorts of difficulties that people might face. So our aim is to fight energy poverty and at the same time to have democratic control over energy. So we established this guide and we sent it to all municipalities and mayors' offices in Catalonia, and we're now translating it into French and English because we'd also like to send it to other places throughout Europe. But we started in Catalonia, so it's a very specific, concrete and practical guide with advice for the councillors who are working on environmental issues in each municipal office in order to ensure that they take the current situation into account. So it's very concrete advice on how to create more civic participation, looking at what pieces of legislation allow them to act locally and how. We decided to concentrate on municipalities because in the beginning we state with this sentence that we've already heard several times, which is think locally, act globally. So we feel that local municipalities are the ones that are closest to citizens, and even if citizens need to respect, rules set by the institutions, there is a local room for maneuver that is specifically focused on the citizens' well-being at a local level. Now, the closest authority to the users of energy is, after all, the municipality, and that's why we've created this variety of tools which come together as a type of action plan. So, firstly, we want to create healthy municipalities. And in order to do that, we have several simple axes of action. One of them being just your daily commute to school, to work, or to wherever you have to go, to think about the whole municipality, to make sure that it's more environmentally healthy, and how energy is used in these spaces. We also talk about reducing environmental debt, and here we're calling on municipalities to really engage in a thought process and to think about the impact that the municipalities' actions are having on the environment, and to create spaces to be able to have those sorts of discussions. So that was a summary, but the guide itself is much more detailed. I can provide you with the guide, although for the time being it's only in Catalan. We haven't had time to translate it into English and French yet, but we will be having it in English and French, and if you're interested in receiving it once it's translated, just send us an email. Then the second axis has to do with the very current debate on urban spaces, particularly in Madrid, where we've realised, or local authorities have realised, that the air is highly polluted. So air in urban areas is an important issue, and in our guide we outline how citizens can and should be involved to give their opinion at the municipal level, because often the rules that are generated by the federal state don't actually match the needs of each individual municipality. So how can the municipalities implement the measures in their areas? Thirdly, food sovereignty. That's also something we talk about in our guide. How can we ensure that the local market and local production does not pollute more than necessary, and how to promote it with very concrete measures. Then there's also an axis along the lines of ensuring that municipalities do not engage in non-sustainable industrial practices, but focus instead on renewable energies, and also perceiving nature as something that contributes to health. Now, all of these measures, or all of these axes of action to generate healthy municipalities, are obviously united in the aim of carrying these actions out within the municipalities to ensure direct participation and to ensure a link between environmental sustainability and direct democracy, meaning that every citizen, no matter where they live, has an opportunity to participate, give their opinion, voice their opinion, and contribute to such actions. Now, how can it be ensured that this participation is effective? Well, so we have our 5 axes of action, and then the municipality or the local authority will contribute to their own sufficiency, so to work with what they have and to think about what else they need. So the mayor's office in question has to publish data, firstly, to make sure that anyone can access the information, both in terms of cost, jobs created in certain energy sectors, so that everyone has access to this information in order for there to be a discussion at the end of the day. Because if you go to a municipal meeting on how to reduce energy costs, say, or how to reduce the cost of the energy bill on the street where one lives, the citizens need to know what they're talking about and have the necessary information. So it's no point having meetings that are so technical that only experts will understand what it's about. It is also recommended to put in place a citizens' energy council to make sure that this is open for everyone. Anyone can participate and have access to all the necessary information. At the same time, there should be an energy and climate table involving the local actors who are active in the energy sector, so that they can be made aware of the need for a transition which is urgent and needs to happen quickly. And of course, there's a lot of environmental awareness raising campaigns in the field of energy, both in schools and in the workplace. So people who work for the municipality, who work in the mayor's office, need to be made aware of what can be achieved and how. The same goes for people working in the area, and it's not about theoretically training people or raising awareness. It's rather about continuous training on renewable energies. And so what we mean by this is a sort of a discussion table or a discussion round that brings together people. It's creating periodic meetings, spaces for people to come together around a table and discuss these issues, not just people who are already aware of the issue and the need for a transition, but also companies that haven't yet thought about how they may contribute to the energy transition at the municipal level. Okay, I'm not going to necessarily continue because I've already talked for quite a while, and you can always ask me questions afterwards. But I'd like to talk a little bit about how all this falls into place in Spain. We've been working on it for quite a while now, and we're starting to see the fruits of our labour. There's a whole movement which is called Mayors for Change in Spain, and it's about creating democratic, participatory democracy in big cities, including such as Madrid and Barcelona, but also in smaller places, and the results have been very concrete. So Ada Colau, the mayor of Barcelona, last March decided together with all the parties, except for the Partido Popular, but, you know, if the Partido Popular disagrees, then it must be good. So with all parties, she got together and decided to set up a public company called Barcelona Energia, Barcelona Energy, and this public enterprise will be used firstly by the Mayor's Office of Barcelona, but then will be opened up to citizens who are interested in purchasing energy from a public enterprise. So this process that we highlighted in our guide is becoming a reality, and it can become a reality not just in Spain but in other parts of Europe as well. So we really want to share the Spanish experience. And now I think I'll leave the floor to my colleagues, but if you have any questions afterwards, please don't hesitate.
Oh, French was good.
Yes, it was very good. Thank you very much. Just one question. Energy poverty. I'm not sure what is meant by that. What do you mean when you say energy poverty? Yes, if you want to take over. No, so that's probably
I'm not
a
in a
good...
hurry. Energy poverty means, well, it's due to families who've been hard hit by the crisis in Spain, not being able to pay their electricity and gas bills. It's too expensive for them and they get cut off. And one of the principles of the public company in Barcelona is that no household can be cut off, can find itself without gas and electricity. In the past, when we had private companies, people's supplies were cut off, and when we talk about energy poverty, we're talking about those families. Now it's been hidden because prices have decreased. Actually, gas and electricity have become so expensive in Spain that a lot of families face energy poverty. And it's due to the fact that our system based on coal is no longer viable. So we need to look again at how we generate energy and deliver it to our citizens. Energy poverty has to do with the environment and household budgets, household economy.
There's another question of understanding, right? Or is it already kind of discussion? Because if it's discussion, then I would ask you to save your statement for later. Okay, thank you very much. The next speaker I give the floor to will be Molly Walsh, here on the right. She's from Friends of the Earth Europe and seated in Brussels. Please.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Molly, as said, and I work for Friends of the Earth here in Brussels, mostly on the issue of renewable energy. So in theory, it's my job to make sure that the energy transition happens fast enough to prevent the worst effects of climate change. But for us in Friends of the Earth, it's essential that this transition happens in a way which is just and fair. Otherwise, we don't want it. One of the reasons is that we think for the transition to actually take place at the speed that's required, we need it to be just. Because we need it to have the support of the workers and the popular classes, as we sometimes say. So the question we're addressing here is best practice in just transition. Do we have actually any best practice in just transition which we can draw upon? And that leads us to the question of what actually do we mean by just transition? Now, I think we could have a whole entire panel, maybe even an entire day about that. And if people want to speak more about it, please do raise it in the questions and answers. But for now, I will just say that for me, it's really vital that just transition is first and foremost about the livelihoods of the workers. It was a term coined by the unions to be about workers and their communities. And it needs to be about that primarily. We can also expand it to be about energy poverty and other matters about fairness in the transition. That's extremely important work, which we also do. But we need to make sure that just transition is rooted in a project for workers' livelihoods. We work a lot in Friends of the Earth on ownership of energy. Fundamental to us is that we, the people, in whatever form, as unions, as cooperatives, as municipalities, that we take ownership of our means of energy production. And in the live debate in the clean energy package, which is happening now, we try to define what community energy projects should be. The Commission tries to define it. And there are various parts of this definition which we fight for. But central to us and to ResCop, the renewable cooperatives, is around control and benefit. So that if you are getting involved in these projects, that you actually have a say, that you have a democratic say in what happens, so that's the control, and that benefit goes to the local community. So there's an example of what's definitely not best practice, either in any kind of energy democracy or just transition. And that's what we see happening now in Germany, in the onshore wind auctions, where what is called a community energy project is getting most of the bids, is winning most of the bids. But these are not genuine ownership, genuine control projects. These are a kind of, we don't quite call it a fake cooperative, but a kind of a constellation which allows basically the big energy companies to slip in as community energy projects. And that's why we fight in the clean energy package for a definition which is strong enough, which includes genuine ownership and genuine democratic control. So an example of interesting good practice is a cooperative in Brixton in London, Brixton Solar. It's a cooperative which is run by the people that are living in the social housing in Brixton. They have put solar panels on their roof. They own these projects. The people who live in the flats, they're basically big apartment blocks. You think of social housing in the UK. And what's really interesting is that they run internship projects, paid internship projects for young kids who live in these flats. And they're 6 months and they're paid internships. And that's for the people who are living in the social housing, so are by default in a vulnerable position, to learn about renewable energy and to get the skills they need to take jobs in renewable energy, to take clean, green, climate jobs. And a majority of people that have done this internship with this solar cooperative in Brixton have gone on to work in the renewables industry. And these are in green jobs. And these are the kinds of decisions which can be made by a cooperative whose mission is for the benefit of the local community, and basically who own the means of production, the solar panels, and can make those decisions, and whose bottom line is not profit. And that links back to the interesting point that we heard about the Barcelona wanting to set up a municipally owned public utility. Brixton also supports the London Switched On campaign, which is a campaign for a publicly owned energy utility company in London to help fight energy poverty and to have clean energy for all Londoners. And this is part of a growing wave of municipalisation and remunicipalisation, which is throughout Europe, taking control of Europe's energy system. And when I was thinking about which kind of projects I would talk about, which kind of stories I would tell, I considered talking a little bit more about the Hamburg case, the remunicipalisation. But I wasn't quite sure, because I know it's been a controversial topic within the union movement. The trade unions in Hamburg didn't support that referendum, didn't support that campaign to take back the energy system in Hamburg. So that's an interesting thing that we can start to discuss and we can start to think about. Like, what is our position on this municipalisation? But for us, what's going to be central for good practice in just transition, for good practice in the energy system, is when people have ownership and control. And an interesting story comes from my colleagues in Scotland, from Friends of the Earth in Scotland, who, with WWF, started working on demands with the Scottish Trade Union Congress for asking the state to start to think about just transition. asking Scotland to start to think about just transition. And they did a bit of work together, and they basically said, you need to start planning. You need to set up a commission, and you need to develop a strategy. And actually they got their first win right away, in that Scotland has now said they're going to set up a Just Transition Commission. And so that's going to be a really interesting thing to keep an eye on, where stakeholders such as environmentalists and the unions are feeding into the national strategy to plan the transition fairly for workers. I'll stop there, and I look forward to a further discussion with you.
Thank you very much, Molly. Are there questions of understanding up to this point? I don't see any raised fingers, so we go on with last but not least, Olivier. Yeah, you're the next. Olivier is from Le Naour, a municipal councillor and also active member of La Partie de Gauche in France. Welcome, stage is yours.
Oui, bonjour, donc je vais
Yes, hello. I'm going to be speaking French. I'm a town councillor in a small commune, coastal location. We have renewable energy issues, not in my municipality, but in our group of municipalities. First of all, something about the context. In France, the number of renewable energy projects, if you were to put them end to end, would exceed the whole of the French territory. It would be twice France, or 2.5 times France. That's the number of projects, applications that have been made so far over the past 6 or 7 years. But once these projects have been submitted, it takes a very, very long time for them to be put into practice. And in the Médoc, in Gironde, it takes an average of 10 years. It takes 10 years at the moment for a project that has been submitted to go through all the processes and into the production phase. That's a very, very long time. It's long because of legal constraints, environmental constraints. So actually environmental constraints preventing the spread of renewable energies in France. But there are advantages to this system too. It prevents abuses. Not all renewables are equally valuable. We have to be careful about the type of transition that we bring about. And there are renewable energies that are far less harmful to the environment than others. I'm thinking of biomass on the one hand, and then solar, which in our region can be damaging to the environment. And then you have wind turbines, which also perturb our environment. In the past, a lot of people wanted growth for its own sake. These days, sometimes I get the impression that there are people who want renewables for their own sake. We don't want that. Now, we have a lot of projects. The Médoc area extends along the Atlantic. It's about 100 kilometers long. We also have mountains. And the Bordelais vineyards, the famous vineyards. Half of the territory is forest, and the municipalities' budgets often depend on managing those forests. The projects handed in, well, there are a great many of them. dealing with solar, wind turbines, biomass, all kinds of projects. But in the Médoc, in many cases the response to these projects has not been favourable, and so far only one municipality in our group of municipalities has renewable energy facilities, and that's Urta, not far from Lacanau, which is on the coast, and it alone will have 3 renewable energy projects, whereas all the other municipalities have 0 projects. Those projects are at a standstill. Why are they at a standstill? Well, because we have classified installation legislation in France, which is very strict, aims to prevent industry from damaging the environment. There are very sophisticated impact assessments, so that slows down and even puts an end to many projects. Many projects do not see the light of day. They don't get beyond the assessment phase because of these very, very strict legal constraints. The Urta municipality, which lies on the coast, also falls under the law of the coast. What is the law of the coast? Well, it forbids urbanisation of the Atlantic coast. The aim being to avoid what happened on the Côte d'Azur or even in Barcelona. I've been to the Puerto del Sol, and a great deal of abusive building, I'm sure that you won't disagree with this, has gone on there. So we don't want the coast to be concreted over. And in the 60s, the urban planning authority for this area decided that construction should happen inland. So in order to be able to build classified installations, renewable energy installations, you have to build in urban areas. You can't build those installations in protected forest, on farmland, or anywhere else like that. And that's a big constraint in terms of the area that you have available to you for renewable energy projects. It's important that you should know that. If we now look at Auton, there we have a project. It took 10 years to go through the pipeline. It was inaugurated in September 2017. It's a biogas project, mainly. Private stakeholders. The aim is to take advantage of maize plantations. We have 2,000 hectares of maize plantations, and maize stalks are a byproduct. There will be a highly automated system, and those stalks will be processed to create gas. There will also be a lot of waste recovery from the vineyards. We're talking about highly toxic products. Bordeaux wine is wonderful, but it does contain chemicals, or there are chemical waste products, heavy metals. Now, in terms of the circular economy, it's important that organic waste should be used in this way, and here it will be converted into biomass. And that is the project that is creating the most jobs, 5 jobs in Urta, in that municipality, which is not a huge amount. But it's a very effective plant. It produces 18 gigawatts. is small, but nevertheless good. There were 2 other projects that will be put in place in January and February, and this time these are public projects. There's another biomass project which should create another 15 jobs, and then there's another more contested project, the Orval project, and it's a PV project. Now, this involves about 30 hectares of land which is currently wooded, and generally speaking it wouldn't have been possible to have an installation like this in an area that is protected forest. However, there was a storm in the year 2000 which destroyed over 80% of the trees standing on that plot. Now, there are PV installations with a capacity of 320 megawatts. Annually it's much lower, 280. There have been many projects like this set up on land where the forest was destroyed by the storm. It would have been very expensive to replant, so an agreement was reached with the forest managers. There are some environmental problems here. And of course, in terms of jobs, you have to remember that PV doesn't create jobs. I mean, absolutely none. Wind turbines, we could have put wind turbines on the land, but they depend on the wind, and we're not a windy region unless you're at altitude, and there are environmental constraints as well. And you must remember that wind turbines can interfere with radar signals. The French classified installations need to have the support of the public, and the public today very strongly express their issues with wind turbines. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Olivier. Other questions of understanding? Up to this point, no. Before I open the stage for your remarks and questions, I would invite another speaker for a brief example. We have spoken a couple of minutes before we opened the panel to have another example, and one from Greece, which is a country that has been named already several times today. And so Takis, who is from Greenpeace in Greece, asked to give a few flashlights from the experiences over there. So please.
Hopefully I can live up to this expectation. Thank you very much for inviting me to address the floor. Obviously, just energy transition is a huge issue. We need to make sure that energy transition is fair. But I would like to sort of try and frame it in a little bit different way, maybe because I'm coming from Greece where energy poverty is a huge issue. Okay, so I would say that an energy transition needs to happen, and we need to make sure that no one's left behind. And I not only mean workers, but I also mean people that cannot afford to pay their electricity bills, for example. And if you leave energy sector aside for a moment and you look at the wider picture, what's happening in the European economy right now, I mean, we've seen the results of austerity policies, of a cruel capitalist economic model, if you like. I mean, we've seen the results. We've seen people are feeling that, they get this feeling that they are left behind. They are disillusioned, disoriented. And they feel that whatever it's been decided for present and for future, they are not included. And sometimes they react not necessarily in the right way. And we've seen how far right rises right now in Europe. So going back to the energy sector, and especially coming from Greece, where energy poverty is a huge problem. Right now, 4 out of 10 households are struggling to pay their electricity bills. And if you consider this for a moment, it's like half the households in Greece right now are having problems to pay their electricity bills. And what the government has been doing so far is provide social policy in the sense that they subsidize their consumption. But this has two major problems. First, it supports the current energy system model, and second, it perpetuates their energy poverty. These people are still, they remain in a stasis, in a need for more help. They are not helped in a way that will once and for all solve their energy poverty status. So what we would like to do instead, and we have been working with municipalities and possibly with the Greek government, is that help these people become prosumers or energy citizens or active customers, whatever that jargon now might be. It's like intervene and make them part of the just transition. You intervene once and they're not left behind, and you get their dignity back, and they are no longer in a position that they feel you need to assist them. So what we're trying to do in a sense is work where energy transition meets social policy and combine those two and change the rules of social policy. We call this social solar. In a sense, we are working with municipalities, and a lot of municipalities now, they have plans to use school rooftop space to install PVs, and the power produced there will be credited to poor families in the area. They're using, and I have to give credit to the Greek government for that, that's virtual net metering. That's the ability to self-consume. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with virtual net metering, but basically you self-consume, you have solar panels, you self-consume, but these panels don't have to be at the place where you are. They can be in another building, in a land, in a community solar park. So basically municipalities are, and right now as we speak, they're laying down plans to create community solar parks in the rooftops of schools, and this energy will be credited to the electricity bills of poor households. And at the same time, we are also talking with the government, and we made a proposal on how to actually do that to 300,000 households in Greece. The idea is you either provide single-family systems or community parks, again with virtual net metering, and over a 10-year period, you lift these households out of poverty once and for all, you bring the dignity back, you make them part of the just transition. I've really no idea what the Greek government will do, although I have to say that the energy minister recently mentioned this, that they're working with the Greenpeace on a proposal, which makes me cautious, of course, because when energy ministers say that, you need to be careful. But the truth is that we believe that this is a future, and it is already happening in progressive states in the US, in California, Colorado, Vermont, New York. I heard that the UK is considering a similar approach. So I would really like to point out here today that we should also consider the option to invest in people, okay? Make sure that no one's left behind. And to conclude, and sorry if I overuse my time, I would like to say also that a lot of these will rely on what kind of winter package we have at the end of the day. And I'm sure that you all know that the news are not good from the European Council. Every day that passes, winter package gets weakened and weakened. So this is a battle that we all have to face together soon. I hope that you, the progressive MEPs that are here, I would like to see more of them actually, but I understand that you are like the most progressive MEPs that there are, so really this is a battle that we must give together and make sure that democratization of the energy sector continues, but equally important, we have a fair and just transition that one's left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Takis, for the Greek perspective. So, please enter the discussion now. And say your name before you speak so people can relate to you after that.
Hello, I'm Sam Mason from Public and Commercial Services Trade Union in the UK. I was really pleased to hear all those contributions, but I'm specifically going to respond to some of the stuff that Molly had referred to and Yasmina around the municipality and energy democracy. PCS, I think I may have said it this morning, I'm not sure if I did or not, but we're part of a global initiative called Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, which is also about a just transition process, but at its heart is Unfortunately, you can't say these words in English anymore, taking back control, but it's about taking back control of our energy system under public ownership and democratic control. So it has a very, very specific agenda to it, and it's about challenging, obviously, the liberalised energy system. Unfortunately, not export from the UK, so I think we've got a special indebtedness to reverse the liberalised energy markets. We have a global initiative which has really been mushrooming in the past couple of years. I mean, across Asia, in parts of Africa, Australia, and we also had a first meeting in Europe, in Geneva in the summer, about establishing a Europe caucus, and we have got a UK caucus, and there are lots of things happening at the moment in the UK, some of which Molly had touched on. In terms of the Switched On London, which you mentioned, the London Energy Company, you may not be aware, Molly, but unfortunately our mayor doesn't support the aims of that campaign, which is really tragic, because someone who's declared himself as the greenest mayor ever of London isn't taking the one sort of really progressive initiatives that he could do in establishing a publicly owned energy company for London. But Scotland have also announced a publicly owned energy companies. So, but I think what's interesting about it, that despite still having a Tory government after the elections in June, we do have a movement across municipal level of local authorities that are now moving towards an energy democracy agenda. So this is happening in spite of the national government policy. We also have a Labour Party that is now supporting, to put it in short, the nationalisation of the energy system. But why this is particularly important in terms of a just transition process, because it now means that we've been able to get into a proper debate within the UK Labour movement, within the climate change motion that was passed at our TEC Congress in September, to talk about the energy system and what that means for workers. It slightly enables us to avoid the fossil fuel question, but we will be having to deal with that at some stage, just in terms of the specifics around whether we want to reclaim the fossil fuel energy companies back into control. But that's all different parts of the discussion, but it's a really lively and important debate at the moment. But that will mean, coupled with that, is obviously all the things that have been mentioned around just transition. But I think what often isn't talked about in the UK context, and I was really interested to hear about what's happening in Barcelona, and have been following some of that, because the democratic control element is obviously often the part which is missed out, and there are really interesting debates happening and starting to emerge around what does democratic control mean and what does public ownership mean, because what we are talking about is decentralising it to the regional, local level, looking at distributed energy, having new forms of ownership and participatory democracy interventions, and what that looks like. So it's actually quite an exciting time. Obviously, if we get a change of government, that'd be even more exciting. But there's a lot of work going on at the moment to build towards that. So I just wanted to make that as a contribution.
Did you? Yeah, please. Say your name.
I am Yuri Dropa from Hungary, and when I'm listening to this discussion about these beautiful ideas and plans, one is fully feeling that this must be supported. We talk about our bright future, but I'm not sure that every day we are making steps towards that direction. We talk about an extreme pollution which comes from the coal mining and the industry which is using the coal mines, and the households which are using the coal. But for example, in our country we have no coal mines anymore. They have closed all the coal mines 20, 30 years ago. They started to be bankrupt in the previous system, and they closed very rapidly, all of them. Practically we have no mines at all, with the exception of stone mines. But even the stone mines are belonging to the family of the Prime Minister. His father is one of the biggest entrepreneurs. When you have 4 million people who is living under the poverty line, when you have 1.5 million people who are living in extreme poverty, you have to face that winter is coming. And you know it comes every year. And the thing they do is they try to not to freeze. And they heat with everything what burns. It is far worse than heating with coal. So I think the most important element which I want to disseminate is that we can only solve these questions together, because poverty and the solution of that so-called bright future, just transition, can only go in hand. So I fully agree with our Greek friend who is saying no one should be left behind, and it would be good that we could also feel ourselves Europeans. And it was also a good idea to say that why don't we help them to become consumers? First of all, they have to live in a room which is insulated, at least a room, insulated and heated. And what we are doing, our group is doing, the Danube Circle, together with the European Left Party, Workers' Party, 2006 in Hungary, is that we are trying to disseminate this information on energy poverty. We are making road shows. We have a plan of 16, and possibly we'll have more of these road shows. Each of them is lasting 1 hour. And we already have done 5. And we are trying to also write studies on housing. How a house should look like, community housing, rented housing for the people who are not living in places which you can call a house. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I see another hand, and I would like to ask you to be brief, because I would also like to hand the word over to the panelists again, and we're almost close to our lunch break. Not lunch break, but coffee break. I need a coffee, as you see. Yeah, but please.
It's Jean-Claude from Transform. I wanted to rebound on what Georgie was saying, but also I probably would like some of the comments on the panel on it. One of the fastest rate of energy poverty today in Western Europe is happening in London. Yeah, you just heard right. And what is going on there is that there is a combination of very high cost of housing and decreasing pay for workers, so that the fastest growing segment is full-time workers in employment. And if you look at their statistics and you take into account what they pay for rent, you realize that 27% of the population in London is now in a state of energy poverty or precariousness. It's something that is almost unknown, and it's been steadily getting worse since 2012. When you look at the income curve for London, you can see that the average pay in London has been steadily decreasing for the last 4 years. And I'd like to have your comments on this. One is, have you encountered, some similar cases in the different regions you work on, and whether you have heard of any means to counter that? I myself, I haven't, but maybe there has been something. But the trend is definitely there, and it's part of the general inequality that's taking place under ordoliberalism today.
Okay, so that's also one of the questions that we hand over to the panelists here. I would like to add another one, because I was expecting it, but let's say at least I was not surprised that most of the examples that we were discussing and that were given or were presented to us today were on the municipality level. whenever we talk about just transition, we either have the discussion about, like the big climate change or the unions in Europe. And then when we get to the best practice and what can we do, what are the examples, we go down to places where people on a very local level act and try something. So my question would be whether those examples that you have presented here to us today, whether you see a potential to scale them up in a way, or at least to define certain preconditions of success for local transition, just transition. So I don't know who of you would like to start. And just leave it up to you. Anyone feels like being the first here? Maybe?
Je vais un petit peu commencer à répondre.
Yes, well, let me try to make a start on the response. From what I've understood, there was a question of democracy. It was stated that that was very important, as well as privatization of energy and precarity. So those are three issues that were raised. Well, on privatization, well, in quite general terms, we go beyond the European directives. I think Europe was the one that started deregulating the energy market with the electricity directive from 1999. So, and other EU directives really drove forward this privatization of the energy sector. Now, there are some examples that we can be named, such as the directive I mentioned, which at the European level led to exaggerated costs for the public sector as well as for the citizens, because privatization often always means, our American comrade talked about the example of California, but as we all know, privatization often leads to high prices, high energy prices, and our colleague from Barcelona mentioned that as well. So the renationalization of at least the sale of energy, maybe not energy production. France knows what state production in energy means, and that just led straight down the road to nuclear energy in our case, so perhaps that's not the best idea. But so maybe not on energy production, but on energy sale we should think about renationalizing. And France, due to EDF being mostly state-owned, there's a certain level of price stability which is very important and which goes a long way to avoiding precarity. And energy poverty, energy precarity, of course, does exist in France, but there do exist certain mechanisms, legal mechanisms, a little bit like for water, which mean that operators, EDF and others, have to provide a certain amount of energy to families who wouldn't otherwise be able to pay their bills. So the law does play a role there at departmental, regional level as well. It's the state basically that picks up the tab for people who can't afford to pay their energy bill. That would be my contribution. Thank you. Yes, let's try and bring some of these things together. I think that, yes, a family that's not doing well, that can't pay its bill, won't care whether or not the energy is renewable or not. They'll be looking at the cheapest option. But that is where the municipality needs to come in. It's not the family's responsibility in that instance. It's about ensuring that this new energy management happens at the municipal level, and whether the family be in a difficult situation or not, the energy always has to be clean and renewable and has to not fall prey to market forces alone. because often with market forces you end up paying twice as much for the same thing. In the case of Barcelona, the energy that the public enterprise, which is generated by the city of Barcelona, is 100% renewable. So it's looking at what's there already, taking that, using it differently, and making sure that it serves society. And this is a radically new way of doing things, but we have to do things differently. We have to do it quickly, and yes, there's certain reticence. Sometimes the citizens wouldn't agree with certain ideas that are environmentally more sustainable, but the whole point is to raise awareness and get citizens to understand why we're doing certain things, and to make sure that we have a counter narrative to lobby groups, for instance, who oppose the installation of a wind turbine, for example. So there's a lot of awareness raising that needs to be done, and I don't think involving citizens in a direct manner runs in any way counter to environmental protection.
Yes, just responding a little bit to some of the topics brought up there, and thinking of Jean-Claude's question about energy poverty. And sometimes we say there are two ways you can tackle energy poverty. One is lowering energy bills, and one is ending poverty, right? So when we have inequality and when we have insufficient wages, people are going to spend a large part of their low income on heating their homes. So we must try to work on both of those things at the same time. We shouldn't think that just by having efficiency standards we're going to end poverty or end energy poverty. Although it's a very important lever for us to work on, and we're very active on the issue of energy access and energy poverty. And it is indeed exactly the municipal utilities who are going to provide the clean, fair priced electricity, where I think a lot of the answers are coming from. And you raise an interesting point about we end up on the local when we start looking for solutions. That's interesting to think about why that is. I think in the current difficult political situation in Europe, it's local spaces where we can build enough power to gain control, and we haven't got that yet on the widespread level. But I think it's by joining up those initiatives. I mean, the initiatives in Barcelona and in London and in Germany, let's bring them together and say we want a municipal energy company for every capital in Europe. Let's start there, and let's go further, and let's do the next thing, because it's those socially owned, people controlled energy concerns which are going to not only provide the affordable energy but also provide the decent jobs, and that's what we're thinking about here.
Thank you very much. You want to add in? Yeah, okay. Because you were asked as well.
Yes, okay.
It's true. Sorry.
To quickly answer your question also about local versus national. I mean, we're working with municipalities, but at the same time, we address the government. We don't believe that if you only work local, you should abandon your national work. No, these two things should happen simultaneously. In fact, if we have successful cases at the municipality level, you can then better lobby the government in order to have a national policy. And also to someone mentioned about the energy efficiency issue. I mentioned that we should help people become prosumers and active customers. Of course, we should never forget energy efficiency. It's just that in my mind, when we know that we need to go to 100% renewable energy system over the next 30 years in order to stay with the 1.5 degrees warming, sometimes you just realize that energy transition It's happening, it should happen fast, and we need to make sure that it's just transition and people also have access to producing their own energy. But we're not forgetting energy efficiency, which opens up another actually debate, which is like reallocation of existing resources. We all know the billions that go to fossil fuels. This is a chunk of money that we should put our hands on and start using this money, reallocate them to energy efficiency investments, go to people's houses and help them become also in this way prosumers. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I say that it's of course a pity that we couldn't answer all the questions and we go on and discuss at the lunch break, I want to thank you and the panel. I want to thank you in the audience, and of course also to the interpreters. It was really good, like the one that I understood. It helped me a lot. Thank you very much. We are meeting here in 25 minutes for the last session. I hope that you will be there and enjoy your coffee. Thank you very much.